get started? Amara, do you want to get started?
Yeah, sorry, I'm hearing another stream coming in. Sorry, hold on. All right. Hello, everyone, and thank you very much for joining our very first live stream on Twitch. We set up this Twitch channel to build a library of content to help you get started in Honeycode. And this is the first stream in a series where we will dive deep into the more complex features of Honeycode. And for our first episode today, we are going to cover role-based access controls. My name is Omri. I'm on the business development team for Honeycode, and we are joined by Daniel, who is a solutions architect for Honeycode, who will take over the stream shortly to demo setting up role-based access controls in Honeycode. So we can move to the next slide, and today we'll start with these few slides where we'll first go over a few reminders about Honeycode, the vision behind the product, and the 4 simple steps to build and share a Honeycode application. We'll then review the concepts of teams in Honeycode and how teams can collaborate. Those concepts are the foundation for the role-based access controls. And then I'll turn it over to Daniel, who will dive deeper into those roles and how to set up access controls in Honeycode. We'll open it up for a Q&A at the end, but throughout the presentation, please feel free to ask questions in the chat, and we will answer them as we go along. All right, let's get started, and we can move to the next slide now. So as I'm sure most of you know, Amazon Honeycode is a collaborative app building tool that empowers teams to boost productivity and work the way they want. You can use Amazon Honeycode for almost anything: team task management, project planning, event management, and regular updates or status reports. And Amazon Honeycode doesn't require any programming experience. To get started, you only need to know how to use a spreadsheet. If we move to the next slide, we've made it so simple, in fact, that you can build and launch your first application in a matter of minutes by following 4 simple steps to go from an idea to a working application that your team can use immediately. Next slide, please. So the first step is to collect and organize your data in tables. Tables in Honeycode look like spreadsheets, they behave like Excel, and they use formulas that any Excel user will recognize or be able to learn very quickly. But they're a lot more than spreadsheets because really they operate like a database. And there are many ways to get external data into Honeycode tables, starting with copy-paste or import from a CSV file. But you can also use these integrations with Amazon AppFlow or Zapier or one of 12 APIs. The next slide will show us our second step, where we have the app builder, where you can create the screens and the layouts for your app and to link your data from your tables to your applications. Next, you can add personalization and automations to your slides. The personalization features will ensure that your team is only looking at the data that is relevant to them. And the automation features let you set up actions that run automatically when certain conditions are met. And the fourth and final step is just to share your newly built applications with the members of your team who will be able to access it from desktop or mobile. So moving to the next slide, we'll discuss a little bit about Amazon Honeycode teams and their roles. So in Amazon Honeycode, teams are groups of individuals belonging to an organization, and you can create a team and invite members of your organization to join. When you share a workbook or an application, the recipient must be a member of that team. When you sign up for an Amazon Honeycode account, a team is automatically created for you. You are that team's administrator, and you can invite others to join your team. You can also accept invites to join teams that others have created. Teams have two roles, admins and members, and your team can have multiple admins or just one. Now, team roles are different from the Honeycode access levels controls that we are going to focus on during today's stream. Access level controls allow you to decide what you can see or do within workbooks or applications. And team roles, on the other hand, control whether you can invite or remove admins and members. So over to the next slide, we'll just take a look here at some of the actions that you can perform as the admin of a team. You have some management functions like inviting and removing team members. You can change the team name or even delete the team. You can also manage accounts. You can view all team management pages. You can connect an AWS account to the existing teams. And you can also manage assets where you can create and share workbooks and applications or remove member from workbooks and applications. And then on the next slide, we will see that as a team member, you can create workbooks, build applications, and share them with the members of your team. On to the next slide. Here we'll take a look at the Teams page. This is the view where you can view the team and then manage the members' roles in the Teams page. Each team is an individual entity, so your teammates cannot see the other teams you belong to and vice versa. However, any member of a team can see the profile details such as name, email, and role of everyone on their team. So next slide, please. Once you have a team set up, Amazon Honeycode offers several different ways for you to work with others. Next slide. First, you can share a workbook, and you can allow those team members to access all parts of the workbook needed to build out tables, applications, or automations. On the next slide, we'll see that you can also share an application, and recipients will be able to access it in both the web and the mobile views. And they can navigate through various app screens to view data, submit forms, and perform any other actions that you have configured. Next slide. You can also set up notifications, and Amazon Honeycode will send an email and app notification message to the recipients. And finally, onto the next slide, we can see here how you can also create focused experiences by personalizing applications and allowing users to see only a view intended just for them. With Honeycode's personalization features, you have that power to control what is displayed to each of your app users so you can securely share sensitive data with the right stakeholders. Often, you'll want your app users to see only specific content. This can be mandatory when you have sensitive information, for example, that only some application users need to see. Or in the case of a sales manager, you may want to allow her to only see the leads for her region. Or you may want Mike, for example, to only see his own personal information and not Julie's as well. Honeycode will also send only the information that you specify to the app user's devices. So this again allows you to make sure that your data is safe and secure. Now, there are several ways that you can maintain data security, ranging from super simple to more advanced, and this is what Daniel will now cover. Over to you, Daniel.
Thank you, Amari. Really appreciate that. Really good coverage of the collaboration capabilities within Honeycode. And as you can imagine, with all these collaboration capabilities come access controls. Even the most basic access controls are going to be important, so you need to be aware of, and that's what we are going to cover in this particular, in the rest of this particular webinar. We're going to first talk about what are the benefits of access controls, and then we're going to go into each one in detail. So clearly, data protection is by far the biggest priority and the biggest benefit here. You can contain the data, make sure the data doesn't leak out, and you need to be aware of what controls are appropriate for what use case. You can also create customized permissions like Amari mentioned. You can also create relevant views and to show the right information, the right tasks for the right users. This will also give you simplified interfaces. Imagine having hundreds and hundreds of rows in a spreadsheet and now going to just seeing the data that you need to work on because you have personalization and because you can put access controls around the data. This also, as a developer and as a builder of applications, gives you the ability, makes it much easier for you to maintain and develop applications because you don't need as many screens. You don't need to maintain as many screens, and makes your screens and your applications a lot more dynamic. In this particular, in the rest of this particular webinar, we are going to look at macro or high-level controls, which come out of the box that Amari already mentioned, teams and sharing of workbooks and apps. And we're also going to touch on personalization, which is also built in, but it does start to give you granular data level control. And we're going to extend that by talking about how would you do an administrator list? How would you make a list of administrator just within your app that is not part of the whole team, but just within your app? How do you create roles and how do you bundle those roles? And then et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. The sky is the limit. You can create as many custom roles as you would like. And finally, we're going to touch up a little bit on APIs, Zapier, AppFlow, webhooks, and email, because Honeycode is not a data island, and so you need to know what the expectations are on that side. So with that being said, let's jump into our first use case. And we are going to look at teams. I'm going to jump into Honeycode. So here's my Honeycode, my drive, like Amari showed. And my drive is essentially my workspace. And within my workspace, I have workbooks, which have these bookmark-like icons, and applications, which have the A icon next to them. So the one thing that Amari mentioned, and a slightly different way to say what he mentioned, is that a team is a container for workbooks and applications. So I look at my teams page, and whoever is added in this team, whoever is invited in this team, if they're a member or an administrator, those are the only people that I can share my workbooks and my applications with. This is a great macro level control. It contains all my applications and all my data in one place and does not allow me to share it beyond that. Mari already mentioned the members versus admins, and as an administrator I can promote somebody, and I can also add a team member, so I can invite somebody else very simply. And finally, the other control that I have at the team level is the ability to specify who can invite other members to this team. And by default, this is set to administrators only, but I can set it to administrators and any member within the team, which is quite broad if you have a large team. And probably a more realistic one is administrator and specified member. So I might give 2 or 3 members in my team the ability to invite others, because if it's a large team, I don't want to have to do the invitations all by myself. This is a fantastic way to grow your team, but at the same time control who gets invited to your team and only put trusted people in that team. It's also important to point out that you can, with one email address, for example, say mary@example.com, can be invited to multiple teams, like Amari pointed out. And the one thing to take away from that is that for billing purposes, that email address will be charged in both teams. So, this is part of how you balance security versus cost. And so you'll have to balance that. We recommend creating new teams only when the data is highly sensitive, for example, HR data, or when the team is so large that you're afraid that your data will get shared with other people within the team, because there is no way to, if I share a application or workbook with another team member with Mary, let's say, Mary can share with John without asking me. So essentially an application can grow and can be shared with other people in the team, but I do not have control to stop that. So if I have very sensitive data or a very specific group of people that I need to work with, I would think about creating a separate team. The other thing to know about teams is that there are of two kinds. So this particular team is just an email-based team, meaning I can invite anybody based on their email address. But I can also have the source of truth for my users be single sign-on. And if I set up single sign-on or to bring user information from an Active Directory or from Okta or OneLogin or some other directory service like that, then I could not invite members here individually, but the members would be added at the identity provider level. And I'll show you that in Honeycode. And this is the one of two things you need an Amazon AWS account for. This is where you would set up, you would onboard for SSO, for single sign-on. And this works with Amazon SSO service in US West 2. Very important. It's US West 2, and it requires AWS SSO. This opens up the ability to connect with any number of identity providers and SSO providers that AWS SSO supports, such as Azure Directory, Okta, OneLogin, and any SAML-based single sign-on integration. The other thing to mention here, very important, so you know the limitations, is that with single sign-on currently, there's work to change this, but currently your domain, for example, if I had a company called danieltet.com, that domain could either be all with email-based teams or all with SSO-based teams. I cannot mix and match. So if you start with email-based teams, then you move to SSO-based teams. The migration is manual at the moment, and you would have to open up a ticket for the onboarding, and you'd have to open up a ticket to move the specific applications that and workbooks that you wanted to move from one team to the other. So please contact us if you need help with that, or if you have further questions about SSO. So let's talk a bit about workbooks. So we talked about teams, and the takeaway from teams is that they help you balance sensitivity versus cost, and you should kind of think about content of the same sensitivity can go together in a very, very large team. You might consider HR and other data being separate from task and project management data and from engineering data, for example, or from recruiting data or things like that. So you need to balance that out. When it comes down to workbooks, within Honeycode, you can create as many workbooks as you would like. You are not limited by the number of workbooks. So one easy way to create a workbook is to start with a purchase order with a template. I'm going to start with a purchase order app. I'm going to call this one test 2. And as soon as I create a workbook, it takes me directly into the workbook itself. And this is where I would manage the 3 components of a workbook: the tables that are available in that workbook, the applications, I can have multiple applications, and the automations in the workbook. One of the recommendations here, if we go back to our My Drive, you can share separately and independently the workbook and the applications themselves. If I wanted to share the workbook, I could simply share the workbook, and I can choose a different person to share it with from my team, of course. So I'm going to share it with Mr. BG here, Honeycode 1BG, and I'm going to update it. Now you will notice that the application was shared with him, and he can be a collaborator or an owner. The only difference between collaborator and owner is that the collaborator cannot delete the workbook, but the owner can. Now the other point to mention here is that I can create as many workbooks as I want, but they're not visible to everybody else in the team, including to the administrator. So administrators do not see all the workbooks that are out there unless they're specifically shared with them. And so I would go through the sharing process to share it with an administrator or a member just the same. The other interesting part here is that if I duplicate this application, and it's going to be called test2 copy, as you will notice here, the sharing privileges do not get copied along. So if I look at share, this is not shared with BG or with another user. This is very useful if I'm going to make a backup or a backup of a workbook, or if I'm going to make a snapshot of a workbook that I want to use to do development in or to experiment. I don't want to trouble the whole rest of the team here. With all my updates and my changes. The other thing to notice here is that within a workbook, in fact within Honeycode, the changes are instant. So if I wanted to look at a manager app, not only does the data, but the screens change instantly. So that is also a very important thing to keep in mind, that when you're making changes, when you're updating, that you could impact a lot of different people. So it's recommended to make copies of workbooks, and it's recommended to make copies of applications to test out large experiments and only apply changes when you are confident that you can make them safely. So the takeaway from workbooks is that you want them to encompass a business case, for example, frequently asked questions or recruiting or something like that. You can have multiple actors and you can create multiple applications for them. And the biggest takeaway is that you want to share a workbook with a very limited number of people, because whoever you share the workbook with, they can see everything that you see. They can change all the screens and the tables just like you can. And so if you don't want them to break it, you probably should train those people first and only then share the workbook with them. So just like a team is a container for workbooks, in the same way, a workbook is a container for applications. Let's switch over to applications and talk about those really quickly and point out a few items here. So notice how in this particular, I'm going to pin it here really quick. In this particular workbook, there's purchase order managers and purchase order requesters. And these applications behave differently. Right, the purchase order requester is for me to enter a purchase order. So I'll say, for project B, the total amount, of course, is $1 million if I was Austin Powers. The description is for my new ride, of course. And it's going to go to Mary Major for approval. So this is the list of POs. I can create a new POs and I can see the history of POs. The other application that's also in this workbook behaves very differently. And this is for managers to approve the purchase orders that have been sent to them. And me as a manager, it's now showing the purchase orders that I have to approve. And I only have a very small purchase order here for coffee and bagels. Somebody else has to approve my new ride, I guess. And this is a very key point of using applications as access control mechanisms. You should create separate applications when the use cases are very different and you don't have to duplicate the same screens. It would not be very helpful to have a list of purchase orders that are entered, or the ability to enter purchase orders in the manager's approval application. So the approval use case is slightly different than the entry use case, and also the users are very different. The manager's group is very different than the individual contributor users. And so that's a key takeaway about applications. And you want to balance this. So the more applications you make, obviously the more screens you create. So the idea is to create the screens only for the things that only to create new applications only when the use case is very different, or you have a very specific security need that is not met by the other security controls that we're talking about in this particular webinar. The other thing is sharing is within the team, so it cannot be shared outside the team, but that also means that I can share with Mary, and Mary can share with John, and John can share with Christopher. So the sharing can be, once an application, I'll show you here, the application itself, it can also be shared. And this is already shared with the owner of the workbook, obviously, but I could share here with, let's share it with somebody else. Let's with HM. And we're going to update because he's a manager. So now he becomes an app user, and that's what we are sharing the applications for somebody to just use, have a ability to use the application but not modify it. The other benefit, the other thing to notice here is that the applications are also not visible to everybody unless the applications are shared with them. So the same thing applies to, it doesn't clutter everybody's view when somebody creates an application or workbook. To summarize, applications are a great way to segregate use cases or different roles into different activities, and they provide complete separation, including not having access to certain screens, and gives you the ability to manage the workflow that way, and to break out the workflow into different groups and to different roles. However, sometimes that is not sufficient. Sometimes you want to go inside of the data and be able to decide which data can be viewed by different people even within a team or even within the group that you shared the application with. So we're now going to move from macro level access and sharing controls to more granular and data specific sharing and access controls. So we're going to call these granular access controls. So for example, let's say that I want to build a very, very simple time off request application, right? And I want to have a date that I'm requesting off. I want to know who's requesting the day off, who's approving it, how many hours they're requesting, is it a PTO or is it a sick day, perhaps some sort of a note and a status, right? That's pretty straightforward. Now, these are obviously two very separate groups of people, somebody requesting and somebody approving. The way to do this very, very easily is to create to create actually one application and to create two separate screens. So I have an approval screen and a requester screen. Notice I did not have to create two separate apps, even though I could. But because I use personalization within my workbook, I can get away with one app and two separate screens. So the way this looks like, if I was going to view the application, right, here's the requests that I've put in, and here's the requests that I need to approve. Right? And the only difference between these two, both of these screens pull from the exact same table. Both of these pull from the requests table. However, one of them looks at who the requester is, and one looks who the approver is. So if I look at this list here, notice that this list is personalized based on who the requester is. If I take the requester away, then my request will show all the items in the table. In order to personalize it just to me, I'm going to specify that I would like the requester to filter out or to select or to limit the view only to those that are personalized to me based on the requester column. And same with the approver. If I look at the list that I'm showing here, it's personalized only by approver. This is extremely powerful, very easy to do, required less than zero code. It just required me putting a couple of lists on the screen and saying personalize. Boom, I was done. And now I have an application that I can obviously have to add a lot more to details and creation and whatnot, but as far as the lists are concerned, they're instantly personalized. Now, the problem with this approach is that it doesn't scale very, very well. If I have, what if I need a backup approver? What if my manager wants to go on vacation sometimes? And so what I end up doing, inevitably, we've seen a lot of customers do this, and this is very natural because you do this in spreadsheets as well. You have your requester and your approver, and then you decide you need a backup approver 1, and later on you decide you need backup approver number 2. And this is fine for this very, very small use case. But if you have an organization with hundreds of people and lots of different roles, and people play different roles on different projects, this becomes unwieldy, and you need something a little bit more powerful to manage it. And that's where we go into role-based controls, where we develop our own custom controls and roles and custom-based controls. So let's switch into that, and I will give you an example of that. Amari, if there's any questions that I need to answer as we go along, please stop me and let me know.
I will let you know.
Thank you.
Thanks, Daniel.
All right, so now we're going to look at, there's 3 patterns that we want to cover here. Once we're going to look at something very, very basic, which is we're going to pretend that we have a very simple meeting request application. So we're building this for executive assistants, and the executive assistants manage lots of requests for multiple different executives, and they really need this application because they've been doing it via email and spreadsheets, and it's just a nightmare. So this application that we're building is going to manage lots and lots of different requests and lots of different meeting types. And this is very basic. Obviously, there's a lot more to build here. But one of the problems that we see right away is that they're going to have to support other meeting types. And right now, we only have 2 meeting types built in. And if I was going to look at this application, let me close some things there. If I was going to look at this application and run it, I will know immediately that they will come back to me and say, hey, I want to add a new meeting type. And then I just don't want to be bothered. I just want them to be self-service, and I want them to add a new meeting type tomorrow if they want to. So right now there's 3 meetings in here. And if I go to the help screen, here's how I've worked around this problem. I go to the help screen and I give them a button to go to a hidden screen that's not part of navigation, and where they to a hidden screen where they can manage the meeting types. And so here they want to, let's say I want to add tea time with Andy Jassy. Okay, so that's a new meeting type that's now available for people to request to meet with Andy Jassy for tea time. And if I go back to my meetings and I want to request a new meeting, let's say I want tea time at golf course. And I would notice that all of a sudden tea time with Andy is available, and the executive assistants manage their own list of meeting types, and they did not involve me. The problem, this is great. I love this. It's now self-service. The problem is that now they're going to come to me, or they don't have to come to me to create these to add these new meeting types, but everybody can see this button, and I only want this button to be available to the executive assistants, who I would call for the purposes of this application, the administrators, not the administrators of the team, but just the administrators of this application. And so the way to do that is very, very simple. I create a separate table within this particular team, within this particular workbook. Apologize. So within the meeting requester, I create another table called permissions, and I simply list who can have permissions. Let's say I'm user Honeycode number 1, but I want to make user Honeycode 1 AG, which is Amari, also be able to be an administrator, and I'm going to take myself away from here, so I'm no longer administrator. Now what happens, if I just wait for 1 nanosecond, or I go back and forth between meetings and help screen, you notice that the ability to click on the management of the meeting types has disappeared. So I can no longer manage the meeting types. If I come back and I add myself back in, then all of a sudden I can put a comment, whatever, that's just optional. But if I come back here and I click on the page, I'm refreshing it, but it will also take effect on its own. All of a sudden this appears. So this is a very, very easy way to create a hidden set of screens, or to hide some data or fields or buttons on the screen. And the way that this works, in the application itself, I go to the help screen, and here's the section that this is the block that I want to hide. And all I do is I change the display to, I say, filter to this particular filter. So I say filter the permissions table and show if me, the system user, the special variable that represents me, the current user, is one of the actors. In other words, you find at least one actor in that list. There's actually two ways to do this. Go to the next screen. So I can use a filter permissions, or I can use the system user is in the permissions actor list. So these are both the same way to do the same thing. And now I have done this. This is great. Now I've given them ability, and I've made sure that only certain people that are managed on that list can see who can see that administrative screen. There is a warning, however, with this, is that this is considered for convenience only, not for security. In this case, adding a meeting type is not the end of the world, and even if somebody could possibly snoop the fact that there's, and by somebody I mean whoever's in the team, whoever has access to the application, right? Because nobody can do anything if they don't have access to the application. But hiding controls means that data is actually sent to the screen or to the browser. The data is still protected by the team boundary and by the sharing controls, but it is technically sent to the screen. So if I was going to look at the source of a particular page, I could possibly see the button, or I could probably see that there exists a button. Not that I could do very much, but it's so we just need to make sure that the warning is there and you're aware of that. It's not considered secure. It is considered convenient way to do this. If you were not comfortable with this, you could always go back and create two separate applications and share them with two separate groups of people. So that covers the very basic access controls for just one group of people. However, the problem here is that all of a sudden I might have multiple teams with multiple requirements, and somebody who's going to come back and say, I only want to see the meetings that I have been invited to, or the meetings that I've created. All of a sudden the access control model gets more complicated. And so this is where we talk about the second pattern, which is the row level security. And in the row level security, I'm going to show you a different workbook here, example number 2. So this is the exact same concept, the exact same application, but we are going to, let's open it up. But now we're going to make sure that I see only the meetings that I've been invited to, or that I've been added to. So sorry, not meetings. Did I say meetings? I meant to say project. So yeah, this is pretend this is a project management app, and I don't need to be on every project in the system, and I only need to manage and see only the projects that I'm allowed to see, or that I'm part of. And so the way to do that is to create two extra tables, create a roles table, and the roles is where I define in business terms what the roles are. So project owner, finance lead, I just made these up, but you can make up as many as you want, as many as make sense to your business. So this is an extra benefit here. Now you can customize these roles specifically for your business and your business use cases. It also turns out that there's not quite as many levels of access as there are roles, and oftentimes 2 or 3 roles will end up mapping to the same level of access. You can do that matrix yourself, and eventually what I found is very useful is to create these levels so that you can have this list be 25 different roles long, but here they all have the same access. Essentially, they can see the same data, they can press the same buttons, and they can get access to the same filter and bring up the same information based on the level, even though they are named slightly differently. And so the way to do this, so besides the roles, I have a contributors table, and in this contributors table I assign who, so here's are my teammates, Amari, Bruno, Daniel, Hemant, and Jake are assigned to this particular project, and they all have a different role. Now notice I'm speaking business roles here. And I think what happened, notice this is a key here. If you delete rows, you are going to break references. And so we're going to fix that in a little bit. But I deleted a role earlier today. So now I can go down to the level of the project itself and create only some very basic summary fields that shows me who are the owners for this project, or shows me who are the leads for this project, or all the contributors for this project. Right? So this is, in spreadsheet terms, you would call this a pivot or a summary field, but essentially it selects, it brings out everybody who matches a certain criteria. And the criteria you can see up in the top here. It shows me everybody who belongs to this project and has the level of lead, or everybody who belongs to this project but has the level of owner. And same with contributor. With contributor, I don't care what level they are. I just care that they've been attached to this project. And so, if I currently can only see one particular project here, I'm going to wonder, well, let's see, how do I make a second project up here? So I'm going to go add myself to the contributors table. Or perhaps my manager or perhaps a program manager adds me to a particular project, and I'm going to add myself to this marketing campaign, and I'm going to give myself the role of, I just want to be a contributor, and I'm an engineer, so I'm just going to appear in that. And all of a sudden, on my projects list, I now see 2 different projects that I have access to. And when I go inside the projects, I can see the details of the project. However, let's say I want to make this start date be changeable, but I only want to make the start date changeable by project owners. So the way I would do that, I only have myself to show you, so I'm going to change my role here. From engineer, I'm going to make it to be, let's see, a project manager. I'm not exactly the project owner, but I'm a project manager. And as a project manager, if a project is not approved yet or is not ready, is not given the green light, I can still make some changes to the data. And so if I look at my projects list now, for this project, I should be able to change the date. But why can I not do that? What did I miss? Let's find out. Oh, I think I added myself to the wrong project, and this project is already approved, so that's why I cannot change it. So let me add myself to the improve. I'll change it. So I'm in the improved operational efficiency project, and this is pending. So now you notice that the start date becomes editable, but it was not editable a minute ago. So the way this is essentially pattern 1, right, where I can hide and show and make editable certain fields, but only if I'm in the right role. So two things we've shown so far. One, we can limit what we can see, and two, we can use pattern number 1 to hide and show data. And the way this is done is on the project details screen. Sorry, first of all, on the project screen itself, I make the list. I use a filter, right, to show only where somebody is in the contributors, where somebody's a contributor to this project. So I limit everybody else so they cannot see all the projects, but they can only see projects where they appear as contributors. And second of all, once I go into the detail for this particular project, I create a start date. The start date is, I put the start date twice. One, it's not editable, one is editable. And I simply put a formula here to say if I'm in the owners, if I'm one of the owners, if I have a role of owner, and the status is not approved, then make it editable. If that's not true, so I literally just use not, then show me just a read-only version. So this is a great way to make the screens very dynamic. We do recommend that you make these rules mutually exclusive, so that's why I just simply use not to invert the statement rather than create another formula. So this is a very, very powerful mechanism. It also supports the first use case that we saw. If I come here in the contributors, and this is what I meant to do last time. Sorry, I need to actually add a role. I'm going to add a role called Program Manager. And I'm going to make the Program Manager an admin because the Program Manager can manage all the different projects. And so now all of a sudden, the help screen also behaves the same way as we've seen before. So essentially, this will not be displayed if the user is not an admin. So very, very powerful way and very simple, 2 extra tables. And now I can manage at the row level, at the project level, I can manage who can see what and which buttons can be pressed. There is one wrinkle to this particular model, and let me actually show you before we do that. Let me show you so here's the formulas, and this will be available to you afterwards. We're going to give you the content. But and here's what the diagram looks like. So there's a projects table with some basic pivots and filters, and there's a contributors table and a row table. If you're a database geek, these are one-to-many, many-to-many kind of table relationships. So the wrinkle here is that it becomes a little painful to add so many users and roles to every particular project. So populating this table can be a little bit daunting, or it can be manual. Even if we make a management screen for it, it's still manual. So one way to work around that, it's not an access control, but it's a slight improvement to this, is to create a template of a project. So instead of just creating a contributors list, which is the master list of who's assigned to what project with what role, I create a template. And the template is basically who I should assign with what role for which project type. So let's say for all the engineering projects, if there's an engineering project, I want to make sure that I assigned these people with these roles automatically. And so when I create a new project of type engineering, I simply copy these 2 columns into the contributors table with the new project I created, and boom, now I have the access control list pre-populated. It's a fantastic little trick, helps tremendously. So that covers the granular access controls. I would like to talk very briefly for maybe 5 minutes or less about the external, right? We talked about external access and external integrations and what those mean for access control and for data protection. So within Honeycode, very important, there are Honeycode has 12 different APIs, and these APIs are they can be called via the SDK, the Amazon CLI, or the SDK can be integrated in your software, or you can simply call them from the command line. I was earlier today playing around with a simple command line, and I just used the AWS Honeycode CLI command, and I said list tables, and voila, there's the list of my tables in that particular workbook. All these APIs that are used in the CLI and in the SDK require a version 4 Amazon signature, which is takes a little bit of practice to get it working right, but it is built in the CLI and the SDK. So we definitely recommend you use the CLI and the SDK. If you want to learn more about the RESTful APIs, you can search for Amazon Honeycode documentation, and here they are. All right. The other thing I wanted to cover is linking an AWS account. These APIs are not useful to you if you haven't linked your account to your AWS account. So once in my team, if I'm in my particular team here, in Honeycode in my team, I can click on the connect button. I punch in the account, the 12-digit account ID, and then when I go into my Honeycode account, I see a request here. A request appears from a new team, and I can accept it or decline it. This is very powerful because there's an extra control on the API. So the APIs cannot be used by just anybody, but they require that team to have access to an AWS account. And so whoever controls the AWS account controls the billing and controls the access to the APIs. Right. Also within Honeycode has also been integrated with Zapier or Zapier. And within Zapier, for example, you want to connect between Salesforce and Honeycode. And you want to trigger if a new record is created, you can create a new, you can add a row in Honeycode, and you can go through that process. It's very, very easy. We covered this in a separate workshop about integration, so I'm not going to bore you with all the details here. The point that's important here is that this does not require AWS account. So if you have access to Zapier and if you have access to a team, you can make this connection automatically. So you want to be careful about that, and you want to maybe set your policy in such a way that integrations with Zapier are only done by those who are trained and know what data to bring in or to take out of your team. And finally, not finally, but next to finally, there's a thing that we call a webhook. So in Honeycode, you can actually build a webhook to call out to a specific endpoint. So for example, this particular button has an action on it to call this Zapier hook. And so these Zapier hooks, I just pass some garbanzo beans, some data, but you can also pull data from the tables or data from the screen and push it out to Zapier or to an AWS API gateway webhook. Essentially, wherever you can make a post, you can call from here. So you would definitely want to have some training for people using these to make sure that they're safe, and you want to think about setting up some authentication, perhaps some patterns in a center of excellence around passing data correctly back and forth, and doing some pre-shared key between Honeycode and the endpoint to make sure that there is some authentication there, and it's not just anybody can call the endpoint. And finally, for external integrations, there's also email. And just like I can call a webhook, I can send an email notification. Now, by default, the email notifications can only go to people within the same team. However, because you can use Zapier and you can use a third-party webhook, you could technically call Gmail or integrate with Gmail to send out email to other people that are not part of your team. So you want to be careful around the email that is not using the default email action. So with that being said, I wanted to close with this particular summary here, that working from at the bottom, we would call sort of the most secure to the least secure at the top. And below the line is what Amazon takes care of. So Amazon takes care of the security of the service itself. And as you go up, you become responsible for all these integrations and all these access controls within your team, within your workbook application, and all the way to hide and show controls, which is just for convenience sake. So I'm going to stop right there. Amari, is there any questions we need to answer, or did we get them all answered in the chat? Otherwise, we should just put up the where people can get more information.
Yeah, we got to all of the questions in the chat. Thank you very much, Daniel, for the outstanding presentation. I'm about to paste again the links where you can leave us feedback, you can reach out to our sales team, and then the link where you'll be able to access the materials that we presented here today. So thank you very much again, everybody. Thank you, Daniel, for a great demo.
It was a pleasure. Thank you, everybody.